Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Nick Robin, and I am happy to be here today. Before we begin, though, I just want to touch light on the recent events with COVID going on in the world, and just to let everyone know to stay positive, because we have basketball coming back into our households at the end of July. Today we'll be covering the NBA reinstatement plan, which teams have the most to gain and the most to lose moving forward, the year-long NBA schedule, including not just the season, but free agency, the NBA draft, the NBA lottery. Basketball, it's usually it's been turned into an 11-month sport, but this year it might be a 12-month sport, and you don't want to miss a minute of it. And lastly, my top 10 list of the day. So stick around to the end of the show to hear my take on the top 10 players of all time. But let us begin with the NBA restart plan. Last Friday, the 30 NBA owners voted near unanimously, 29-1. The one team in a disagreement, the Portland Trail Blazers, for obvious reasons that we've seen in the media with their star player Damian Lillard being against playing pointless games, which completely understand. The 22 teams that will be arriving to Orlando all have a legitimate shot at the playoffs. So let's look at that. So there's 22 teams. That means we eliminated 8 teams. Out of the 22 teams, 12 are already playoff locks. In the East, we have the Bucks, the defending champion Toronto Raptors, Boston Celtics, Miami Heat, Indiana Pacers, and the Sixers. In the West, we have the LA Lakers, looking to make their first playoff appearance since 2013, which, let's touch upon that for a sec. I mean, it's been a rocky road for the Lakers the last 6 to 7 years. Retirement of Kobe Bryant, trying to go young with all the draft picks, taking a big gamble by getting rid of every significant draft pick outside of Kyle Kuzma that they had between the years 2014 and 2019 in order to land Anthony Davis. And in the meantime, it's worked out. They have the best record in the West, led by LeBron James, who's still going at a high level after 17 NBA seasons. And Anthony Davis, who's played at an MVP level. And then the bench, of course, has played very strong as well. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope shooting right around 40% from three. Caruso has been clutch at times. Dwight Howard has rejuvenated his career in a kind of six-man role with the team as just a rebounder and a scorer, not even posting him up much, just getting those garbage points, which we all love to see. We love to see those players those Dennis Rodman types that play with just so much energy and are willing to do the dirty work that a lot of players sometimes aren't willing to do. So it's exciting to see the Lakers back at the playoffs. Then we have the Clippers coming in with Kawhi and Paul George, and I think that's the team that most of us expect to see great things from coming out of the break, as they allowed Kawhi and Paul George 3 full months of rest. Then we have the Nuggets, the Jazz, the Thunder, who I think has been one of the biggest surprises in the NBA this season after getting rid of Kevin Durant, after having Kevin Durant leave in free agency in 2016, and then having Russell Westbrook be traded this past offseason. I think most people around the league thought the Thunder were going to take a step back, but the point guard himself, Chris Paul, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Dennis Schroeder, who has found a rejuvenated game after seeing the absence that Russell Westbrook has caused for more touches in the offense. It's a beautiful thing to see that 3-guard lineup led by Billy Donovan, and he's done a great job. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for Coach of the Year because, I think Vegas had them at about 33, 34 wins for the season, and they already find themselves with 40 wins and the 5th seed in the Western Conference. Western Conference isn't what it's been the last couple of years, but it's still, I'd say, a little bit better than the Eastern Conference. So I'd say big congrats to them, and it'd be exciting to see what they can do in the playoffs. And the last lock as of now are the Houston Rockets. As I mentioned, Russell Westbrook was traded this offseason and has created a good team chemistry with lead guard James Harden. So another exciting team that's been really emphasizing that small ball lineup. They used it to take out the Lakers a couple weeks before COVID paused the season. And then lastly, we do have the Dallas Mavericks with Luka Doncic, another MVP candidate, 7 games ahead of the Grizzlies. So unless they have a tumultuous meltdown, we will be seeing them in the playoffs as well. And then now to the non-guaranteed teams. As I mentioned, the Mavs are magic number of 2 to make the playoffs. The Nets without KD as it's been all season, as well as Kyrie Irving. Magic, the Wizard, Grizzlies, the Blazers, Sacramento Kings, the Spurs, Suns, and I'd say most importantly and most excitingly, the New Orleans Pelicans, led by Zion Williamson, who has literally put the NBA world on pause with his miraculous play after missing nearly half the season. So the details as we see them today. Teams will be reporting to Orlando July 7th through the 9th. From there, they'll go into a 3-week camp with daily testing, and we'll have to start self-quarantining starting July 16th. So there's a couple of issues I see with the restart plan, particularly for the teams that had a lot of success prior to the pause in the season. And I'm talking about home court advantage for the Bucks, Raptors, Celtics, Heat, the Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, and Jazz. So how are those teams going to be rewarded for the great season they've had thus far? I mean, maybe we have the lower seeded teams sleep in a crappier hotel. Maybe we allow the higher seeded teams to choose the playlist during the game, since we'll get into this later that there will be no fans in attendance. So that's one thing that we need to figure out is what advantages are we going to be given to these teams that have worked so hard all year to be in the place that they are right now. Issue number 2 is the compressed and complications with the schedule. The teams that will be in the finals could play as many as 36 games in only 73 days. That could cause a lot of issues, especially for teams like the LA Clippers that have been very public with resting their players, even when they're not hurt, as part of the new load management tactic. So that's one issue we can see moving forward. But for some of these teams that have less to lose with the regular season, we could see them, like for the Lakers, for example, we could see them resting. A lot of their players are having LeBron and AD on a minute restriction leading up to the playoffs. We are in uncharted territories right now when it comes to NBA basketball. And I think this allows the NBA the freedom to do a lot of things they wouldn't normally do in a normal year. For one example is we're looking at the play-in tournament, which I think is a tremendous idea. So the way that works is the 8 and 9 seeds, if they are separated by 4 games or less, they will have the ability to play a 1-game playoff. In order to give the 8th seed an advantage, all they have to do is win 1 game. For the 9 seed, they would have to win 2 consecutive games in order to make the playoffs. Looking at the schedule right now, the Wizards are 5.5 games back of the Orlando Magic in the East. So the likeliness of there being a play-in tournament for the East is very unlikely. But in the West, we have a very tight race as we see the Grizzlies, Portland Trailblazers, New Orleans Pelicans, Sacramento Kings, and San Antonio Spurs separated by 4 games total. So the race for the 8 seed in the West is going to be very exciting moving forward. But in my personal opinion, I don't think it's a big deal for whatever team doesn't make the 8 seed. Because, the best case scenario, you win out, you win the 8 seed, you win the play-in tournament if it comes down to that. Then you play the LA Lakers, who I think most people in the league feel are a guaranteed Western Conference Finals playoff team. So I think it's not the end of the world if you don't win the 8 seed, but I think most of America, and me included, want to see the Pelicans, and Zion, and Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, the former Lakers, Lonzo Ball, play against LeBron, AD, Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee in that first round playoff series. I think that'd be very exciting to see the King playing against the Prince. And with the 3-month hiatus, I think anything can happen right now. I think what happened in the first 4 to 5 months of the season can be completely erased. What happened in the past won't affect what happens moving forward in the future. New Orleans is a completely new team from what they were at the beginning of the season. Before COVID, they won 8 of their last 13 games. They were coming on very strong. Zion was playing looks like he could take the Rookie of the Year trophy away from Ja Morant, who has been the front runner all season long. So we have a very interesting race in the West for that 8 seed. I think that the NBA, though, could have done a little bit more with the play-in tournament, and I think they played it safe, where I think it would have been interesting to have a 7, 8, 9, 10 play-in tournament for the last 2 seedings in the West and Eastern Conference. I think that would draw a lot of ratings. It'd make up for a lot of money loss. And that's coming to that next topic. The final issue with the restart plan is the bookkeeping matters. What kind of salary cuts are we going to see the players take now that they're playing anywhere from 10 to 12 to 15 less games than they would in a typical season? How are we going to see this affect the cap for the 2021 season? And lastly, how is the season going to look in 2020-21 with the end of the season coming in October when training camp in the preseason typically has started by then? So the ramifications for this year are going to continue into next year. So it's going to be exciting to see what the league decides to do. And all the dates set right now are tentative because with COVID still a major issue, things could be put on hold. So it's going to be very interesting seeing what happens moving forward. But I think most of the world is going to be excited to see NBA back in their households come end of July. Summer basketball. Instead of the summer league, we have real basketball. Couldn't ask for anything better. But let's think about that. So we're currently in a world pandemic, and the fact that we're pushing a sport to come back during a time that it might not be safe for the world, is it really the most logical decision? I mean, I'm a huge basketball fan. Like, I'm all for this happening, but like, is it really the best for the health of the players, the coaches, the training staff, their families that are going to be involved, the city of Orlando? So I think that's something that we all need to think about. Is this really the best case for the NBA, for America? I think it would do good for us as Americans to see live sporting events, especially the NBA, which is such a big part of America, and in my opinion has taken over MLB and NFL as the primetime pastime of our country. So there's going to be a lot of differing opinions. Should we be using all these testing tools on these players when a lot of our country is still in turmoil? But again, we'll see what it looks like moving forward. Hopefully there aren't any issues with players catching COVID, but we're just going to have to wait and see about that. And then back to what I was talking about earlier is no fans are going to be present at any of these games. So that's going to be very interesting. Are we going to mic up players? Are we going to be hearing more sounds that come on the court in the huddles. How is this going to affect teams moving forward? Some people, from some sources, I've heard that they might have 2K, video game, NBA 2K, have the sounds of the crowd coming out of the PA during the game. Will that be distracting? I mean, nobody knows nothing until that first ball rolls onto the court and we see how it's going to look moving forward. Yeah, the NBA is about to go into uncharted waters, and really, we don't know what it's going to look like. I think we're doing the best job we can right now with what's going on to put out the best product on the court. Back, though, to the play-in tournament. As I mentioned, I think the NBA is playing it safe, where they could have done so much more with how things were going to look moving forward. We could have done a 1 through 16 seeding, where we eliminate the conferences, where we have the number 1 seed going up against the 16 seed, 2 versus 15, 3 versus 14, and so on and so forth. I think that would have given it a little bit more of a March Madness feel. Maybe if we had played the first round as best 3 out of 5 instead of 4 out of 7, that could eliminate a couple extra games, make this go a little bit faster, or give the players a little bit more rest between games. Because, as I mentioned earlier, 36 games in 73 days, that's 1 game per day. Exactly, almost. And I don't know if we're going to see, like we did during the 2011-2012 lockout or during the 98-99 year, where we're going to see a lesser product on the field due to the exhaustion that we're causing our players by playing them so frequently. So we're just going to have to wait and see. I really thought that the NBA could have done a lot more in this situation to bring us something different. Because, I mean, this season, it's almost a wash at this point. There's going to be they talk about asterisks, and yes, there will be an asterisk at the end of the season for whatever team wins the championship. And it's funny because we don't talk about the 2011-2012 team, the 2011-2012 Heat, or the 98-99 Spurs in terms of the asterisk next to the championship, because in 98-99 they played 50 games. In 2011-2012 they played 66 games. So we find ourselves in an interesting spot. So, I think there was a lot more we could have done to change things up and seen if what we're doing for this season could be used moving forward into the following years. But I think all of us are just happy to see basketball coming back. And looking at that, it's going to be interesting. It's like a AAU tournament. And I think this could be some great reality television. I know Mark Cuban mentioned on the All the Smoke podcast about the opportunity of turning this into a Hard Knocks to the NBA. And I think that would be an amazing idea. There's so much drama, so many storylines that the NBA has every day. And I think putting them into a quarantined area in Orlando, Florida would just make the drama go tenfold. We would see how the players interact with each other off the court, what players are doing to blow off steam when they're not playing, players going on dating apps, trying to sneak women into their hotel rooms. There's so much that could happen here. What players are having sleepovers, which players aren't invited to those sleepovers. I just think there's a lot of material that we can work with here, and I think it would just add to everything the NBA has going on for itself. And, tell me, there's so many trashy reality shows out there on Netflix right now and Hulu. Who wouldn't want to see what happens behind closed doors in the NBA? Just my 2 cents, but we'll see what happens. There's still time to plan it. As of now, it's June 12th, and we have almost 50 plus days till the restart of the season. So there's plenty of time to talk with studios, get a company to come in, shoot all this, make it into a great reality TV show that years later we're going to look back on and think about how great this time was. Because, we're never going to see anything like this, hopefully again in our lifetime, where the season was shut down, it came back, there was one designated location. Orlando, Florida is great. I was kind of hoping for Las Vegas, Sin City. I think that would have just added to the drama. There's a lot of courts. They play in the hotels. But you have UNLV Stadium right down the street. I just think there might be a couple more facilities there. But I know Orlando at Disney World has a ton of fields and a ton of courts and access to many different facilities there as well. But I don't know. Something about Sin City really gets the blood boiling there. So we got a lot to look forward to moving forward. And I'm going to take a little break here. And next we're going to come back and discuss which teams have the most to gain and which teams have the least to gain with the restart of the season. So stay tuned and look forward to talking when we come back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
We are back here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast with your host, Nick Robin. And in the first segment, we discussed the reinstatement plan for the NBA and some of the factors and issues that might come from this plan. As we discussed, the home court advantage / benefits of the teams that worked hard this year, the compress and complications with the schedule, and then the bookkeeping matters. And stay tuned to the end of this episode as I will be diving deep into my top 10 players of all time. So let us begin with our next topic of which teams have the most to gain and the least to gain from the restart of this season. So the teams will start with the most to gain from the restart. Number one, and on the top of most people's minds, is Zion Williamson and the Pelicans. So Zion went to Duke last year, was at the forefront of the college basketball scene. One game, he blew out his sneaker, and it went viral, nearly. That this guy was so powerful when he went to the hoop, or when he made a move on the basketball court, that his shoes couldn't even handle it. And we all know about the dunks, the athleticism, the pedigree, how he's supposed to be the next LeBron. And we come to the 2019-2020 season, and unfortunately, he had to sit out nearly the entire first half, which really put a dent into the beginning of this season because we had heard so much. We were looking so forward to this superhuman being who is listed at 6'6". He's listed at 6'7", 6'8" in college, but when he came to the league, you needed exact measurements. And now he's listed at about 6'6", but plays like someone who's 6'10", 6'11". The way he can dunk on almost anyone. And he hasn't disappointed thus far, putting up big numbers to begin his NBA career. Give me one sec. Let's see. So the Pelicans, it's not just a one-man show here. We have a former Laker trio in Brandon Ingram, who's been averaging around 25 a game, as he's now been the centerpiece of the offense for the first time in his career. Lonzo Ball, who is not just a great passer, but a very underrated defender. And then Josh Hart, who is a key reserve for the Pelicans. And then they have the veteran presence of players such as J.J. Redick, Derek Favors, among many others. So we're looking at this team moving forward. They won 8 of the last 13 games, beating Minnesota, Miami, played the Lakers very tough, lost in overtime to Dallas, and Zion's been putting up all-star numbers, averaging 24 and 7 in only 30 minutes of play, less than 30 minutes of play. So that's a team I look to make a deep run once the season begins, because they basically have to go 6-2 realistically, maybe 7-1 to have a realistic shot at that in-game playoff spot against the number 8 seed, which, that is entertainment in itself, seeing the number 1 pick, Zion Williamson, hopefully go up against the number 2 pick, Ja Morant, in what would be an exciting play-in game. So that's a team I think that has the most to gain from the restart of the season. To the second team, I look at the Brooklyn Nets, who, yes, Kevin Durant hasn't suited up yet, and yes, they are losing Kyrie Irving, but there's still so much talent around that team with Jarrett Allen, DeAndre Jordan, Caris LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, who played a lot last year, and then had to take a back seat to Kyrie when he came in. But the guy's, even this year, he's averaged nearly 20 a game. So that should be another team that can take advantage of. Basically, they're playing with house money at this time. Next year, they're gonna be a completely different team next year as Kevin Durant comes back and hopefully will be healthy moving forward. But again, the injury he went through, it's a tough one on that Achilles and for the knee. So we don't know what's going to happen with him, whether he's going to be 100% or not. And then with Kyrie, it's always unpredictable and whatever kind of mood he is in that day. But we all know he's one of the best shot makers, not only in the game today, but of all time. So the Nets are another team to look out for that have a lot to gain moving forward in the restart of the season. And then lastly, we have the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic, Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps, as we know, missed about a year and a half due to an ACL tear with the Knicks, was traded last year to the Dallas Mavericks, and has come on strong as of late. And Luka Doncic is playing better than any 20-year-old that the league has ever seen since LeBron. So that's another team that can make a great run in the playoffs. They have a great point differential, although they are the 7th seed. I would like to see them get into that 5, 6, or 4 range, as they're only a couple games out. And I'd rather them not play either the Clippers or the Lakers in that first round, as I can see that's a dark horse team to make the Western Conference Finals this year, as they do have a deep bench and a great coach in Rick Carlisle, who won a championship with the team in 2011. So now we've discussed 3 teams that have the most to gain. And now let's take a look at the 3 teams, players, situations that the most to lose from the restart of the NBA season. And the first one that comes to mind is LeBron James. He's 35 years old. He's been preaching to the media since the hiatus began that he doesn't want the season to be restarted or doesn't want the season to be shut down, and for obvious reasons. As I just mentioned, the guy's 35 years old. You don't know how much he has left in the tank. He's been playing at an unreal level this year, leading the league in assists for the first time in his career. The team's running on all full cylinders. They beat the Clippers and the Bucks, 2 teams that are final contenders, and beat both of them before the season was put on pause. So the Lakers are looking really good right now. And yeah, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen next year with the Warriors coming back with Clay and Steph and maybe the number 1 overall pick that they can use with Andrew Wiggins to flip into, who knows, Giannis if he doesn't sign a long-term contract. And then we have the Nets, as I discussed earlier, that have KD coming back along with Kyrie. And then you have the Bucks, you have the Clippers in their second year with Kawhi and Paul George. So there's a lot of uncertainty going into the next NBA season for LeBron and the Lakers. If they're ever going to win a title, this is the year. LeBron's been telling people he didn't want the season to be canceled, so he got his wish, and things are going to start soon. So now it's time to put his words where his mouth is and show everyone why he wanted to continue this season, to get to that 4th elusive championship. So if they burn out in the 2nd or 3rd round, it will be a failed season by all expectations for the Lakers. The next team that has the most to lose is the LA Clippers, the load management Clippers. With Kawhi and Paul George have been sitting out here and there throughout the season, they've been given now 3 months of rest. With a team that just added one of the Morris brothers, along with who did have Joakim Noah for a 10-day contract, but that, again, has been voided since the season was put on pause. They have all the pieces to make a deep run and get the Clippers to their first championship. Again, with all the rest, the players should have no reason to complain about being injured or feeling tired. It's now a sprint, not a marathon to the end of the season, because as I pointed out, some teams are going to have to play 36 games in 73 days. Then lastly, we have Giannis and the Bucks, who are Giannis, only 25 years old, But we're at a crossroads right now between his career with the Bucks, as last year he won MVP, but they flamed out in the Eastern Conference Finals against Kawhi and the Raptors. And this year, he's been playing out of his mind, even better than the MVP season of last year. I think we can already give him the trophy because there's no argument. As much as a personal LeBron fan, as much as LeBron has done this year for this Lakers organization, turning them from a 35-win team to already a 49-win team from the previous year, Giannis has blown everyone away. He leads the NBA in almost every major statistical category when it comes to scoring efficiency, and he has his team with the best record in the league. So last year they burned out in the Eastern Conference Finals, and this year again they have a clean slate. The Raptors lost Kawhi. The Celtics, they're young and upcoming, but the Bucks, I feel like, have the veterans and the best player in the world. And when you have the best player in the world on the court, more than likely you should win the game. So those are the three teams that I think have the most to lose with the restart of the season. Again, LeBron and the Lakers, the load management Clippers, and Giannis and the Bucks. Now, moving forward to some of the most anticipated storylines that we have going into the restart of the season. The number one thing that I think of is the conditioning/early play of these teams. A lot of these players haven't had the luxury of having a basketball court in their house or having the ability to go shoot around for the last couple months until most recently when a lot of teams reopened their facilities. So a lot of players, it's like the start of training camp. They're coming in rusty. They might be coming in a little bit out of shape, but I think nowadays players are smarter of keeping their body in check during periods like this. So we'll see what it looks like coming in, but this might add to more injuries in those first couple games. Some teams, as I mentioned, as the Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, Celtics, teams that have locked in their playoff seedings might be putting a lot of their players on minute restrictions and easing them back into play as to not suffer any injuries going into the playoffs. And then I'd say probably the most interesting development coming into this new restart is the new NBA roster rules / the signing of players and two-way players. So starting a little bit before July 1st, there will be a 1-week transaction window where players can use, or where teams can use their mid-level exception. They can sign free agents. They can switch a player from a two-way contract to a regular contract. So there's a lot of things that teams can do moving forward before the July 31st start. So coming into Orlando, each team will have 17 players, 14 to 15 which are on standard contracts, with the additional players being on two-way spots. Once the playoffs hit, the rosters will be trimmed down to 15 players, 13 active, 2 inactive. So in case of someone, hopefully not, but does contract COVID, you'll have the 2 inactive players to replace the player affected with COVID. So as of right now, these are the teams with available roster spots going into this July 1st transaction period. We have Denver, the LA Clippers, Memphis, Oklahoma City, but they only have the ability to sign a two-way player. Philadelphia also can only sign a two-way player. Phoenix, who has the ability to sign a two-way player as well as a regular contracted player. And then Portland, Sacramento, and San Antonio. So for a lot of these teams, particularly Phoenix, Portland, Sacramento, San Antonio, and Memphis, teams that are on the fringe playoff spots, these additional pieces could make a big difference in their team making or not making the playoffs. So the best potential free agents we have, and just to clarify, players such as Nikola Mirotic, who's played in overseas this year, will not be eligible to be re-signed for the restart of this NBA season. However, there are a lot of solid players still left on the table, such as Derek Walton Jr., who's a career near 37% G League three-point shooter. That is definitely a piece that could be added to a lot of these teams that lack perimeter players. Next, we have the former All-Star Isaiah Thomas. He played 37 games for the Wiz this year, averaged around 12 points. However, he hasn't shown the same ability to get to the basket or the same ability to score since his injury a couple years back with the Celtics. And also, he is probably one of the bottom 5 defenders in the entire NBA. So he could be a good spark plug off the bench, but for teams that defense is such an important factor in today's game and being able to guard multiple positions, he might not be the best fits for some of these teams. Then we have our first wing player, Alan Crabb, career 39% three-point shooter. However, he's only shot 30% this year for Atlanta and Minnesota. If he is able to regain his touch, though, he might be the best three-point shooter on the market. Next, we have Jamal Crawford, another wing. Doesn't really fit into the 3-and-D model that we're looking for in today's game. The guy just turned 40 years old, but the last time we saw him on a basketball court, the 2018-2019 season finale for the Suns versus the Dallas Mavericks, he dropped 51 points. So he's still a legitimate threat even at 40 years old. Next, J.R. Smith played in a lot of big games during his time with LeBron and the Cavaliers. However, even the Lakers chose to go with Dion Waiters over J.R. Smith. And on the negative side, he's been out of the NBA since November of 2018. So there's a little bit of rust there, but I think at the end of the day, he's still a capable NBA player that's going to help you more than he's going to hurt you. Then to a couple of bigs. Marcus Cousins will be nearly a year removed from his last injury once the season restarts. He was waived by the Lakers in February, and he showed last year in the playoffs with the Warriors that he can still do a lot of good for a team. However, he did have some issues defending players that were a little bit quicker and faster than him, especially with the injuries he's had over the last several years. So it's a gamble, but again, another effective player that can help a team in the playoffs for a good 20-25 minutes off the bench. And then lastly, another player I want to touch on is Joakim Noah, who I mentioned did sign a 10-day contract with the Clippers right before COVID paused the season. He hasn't played in a year, but Doc Rivers came out and said he's definitely a player that could help a team moving forward. So definitely another player to keep your eyes on. And then lastly, one of the more interesting storylines and what started this entire NBA hiatus is Rudy Gobert, who, as we all know, on March 12th, 13th, tested positive for COVID. And within 48 hours, the NBA season was put on hold. And it will be interesting to see his relationship with not just Donovan Mitchell, but his entire team. There were reports that came out that they wanted to trade him, that this wasn't going to work out, but it looks like he's made amends with Donovan Mitchell, but it will be interesting to see how their chemistry is on the court. In my opinion, yes, what Gobert did was juvenile, him touching the microphones, him touching players' stuff in the locker rooms, not taking things seriously, and as we all saw, things really got serious quickly, but I think all relationships are mendable over time, and Rudy Gobert is a first-team all defensive player. He's won Defensive Player of the Year, I believe, multiple times now. So as long as he's not doing anything too serious, it's hard for me to make the argument to trade or get rid of a player who's so impactful to his team on the defensive end, and also a great finisher around the rim. But again, it will be interesting to see how the Jazz play moving forward, because there has been publicized strained relationship between him, Donovan Mitchell, and the rest of the team. So that will be very interesting to see how that plays out moving forward, whether it affects them negatively, positively, and whether they can make a deep playoff run, because they're a team that has been nearly over the hump these last couple seasons, but just doesn't have enough offensive power to get there. And losing Bojan Bogdanovic, who's a great three-point shooter, isn't going to help either. So it'll be interesting to see how they look moving forward. So we just broke down the teams that have the most to gain, including Zion and the Pelicans, the Nets, and the Dallas Mavericks, and the teams that have the most to lose with the restart of the season, including LeBron James and the Lakers, load management Clippers, and Giannis and the Bucks. And we discussed the most anticipated storylines, particularly the new NBA roster rules, the conditioning / early play injuries that might come into play early on. And then lastly, we touched upon some of the best available free agents and the relationship between Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, and the Utah Jazz. Thanks for listening. We're going to take a little break here. Again, I'm your host, Nick Robin, and stay tuned because next we'll be discussing the NBA schedule, not just for the rest of this season, but for the fall with the NBA lottery, the NBA draft, free agency, and how everything's going to pan out moving forward and into the 2020-21 season. So stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
We're back here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast Network, and we just discussed the teams that have the most to gain and the most to lose with the restart of the NBA season and some of the most anticipated storylines. So now we're moving on to kind of a breakdown of what we're looking forward to over the next several months, not just with the restart of the NBA season, but also with the NBA draft lottery, NBA draft, and free agency. So let's take a look at the schedule as it now pertains to the timeline moving forward. So as I reported earlier, July 7th and 9th, teams will arrive into Orlando. We're set for a quarantine beginning on the 16th, and first games will resume. The season will resume on July 31st. On August 3rd, that will be the last day for college players to withdraw from the NBA draft. If everything goes well in our favors, we will be having a play-in tournament August 16th through the 17th. And from there, the first round will begin immediately on the 18th. A week from then, we will have the NBA draft lottery. And as it stands now, in the exact order, if all the ping pong balls were to go in the correct order, which they never do, we'd have Golden State with the number 1 pick, followed by the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Atlanta Hawks, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Detroit Pistons, the New York Knicks falling in at 6. That's not going to help the franchise get back to where they want to be. Number 7, Chicago Bulls, 8, Charlotte Hornets, the Washington Wizards, the Phoenix Suns, the Sacramento Kings, the San Antonio Spurs, who, just so we point out, I don't think have been in the lottery since 1997 when Tim Duncan was drafted number 1 overall. And then the Portland Trail Blazers, and to wrap up the lottery, the New Orleans Pelicans. But as we've talked about, we hope to see them get into that play-in tournament or that 8th seed and play the Lakers in the first round because the whole world wants to see LeBron versus Zion, the young prince versus the older king. So we do have, discussing the draft, it's not one of our stronger drafts in recent memory. There's no real consensus on the number 1 overall pick. I'd say there's about 4 players that have a legitimate shot at being taken number 1 overall, including Anthony Edwards out of Georgia, James Wiseman out of Memphis, Isaac Okoro out of Auburn, and LaMelo Ball, who we all know has been playing in the NBL out in New Zealand and Australia. So with 8 teams already season being done, they have a lot more time to anticipate for this year's draft. Particularly, I think the Warriors find themselves in a very interesting spot After making the finals for 5 straight years, I think the organization deserves a nice break from what's been going on. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that number 1 overall pick, because there's been rumors going around that they want to somehow get Giannis to come join Curry and Thompson on this Warriors team, which would just be... I mean, if we thought KD was unfair, having Giannis, who at only 25 is just starting the prime of his career, would be unfair. Let's look more at who they might take with that first number 1 overall pick. In terms of a talent perspective, most people I think are going with Anthony Edwards out of Georgia, 6'3" combo guard who could add a nice scoring touch into the mix with Clay and Curry and Draymond and Andrew Wiggins. But a better fit, I think, might be LaMelo Ball. More of a distributor, pass first, can hit the deep three as well, which goes well with the Splash Brothers. But it will be interesting to see what they do with this lottery pick, whether it's number 1, 2, 3, or 4. Another player that I'd say is very interesting on a lot of people's radars is James Wiseman. The guy went to Memphis, balled out in his 2 games there, looked very promising, but then again, like many players we've seen in the past, got hit with accepting money or what other allegations were against him. So he saw an early exit from the college game, which I think is going to take somewhat of a dip in his stock, because why would you take someone like James Wiseman, who hasn't played in a competitive game in nearly 8 to 9 months, when you have guys like LaMelo Ball, who played an entire season in a professional league, guys like Anthony Edwards, who played in a full season at Georgia, or guys like Onea Akinoa from USC, who honestly is one of my favorite players in this draft because of what he brings to the table from being able to guard positions 1 through 5, which I don't think it can be talked enough about in today's game, but to have a player who's able to go from guarding a 5 to a point guard is very valuable in today's game, because it's all about switching. It's all about being able to shoot the 3, and players like Bam Bam Abayu have shown that players like Akinoa can thrive in today's NBA. He can play a little bit of that point center or point forward like LeBron James. And I think his skill set really transitions well to today's game. The last player I want to touch upon in this year's NBA draft is Deni Avdija out of Israeli Maccabi Tel Aviv. It's great to see a fellow tribesman, similar to myself, making a name for himself overseas. He's got that nice Euro game. People have compared him to Luka Doncic, but a little greener, not as seasoned as Luka Doncic, who was the MVP of the EuroLeague, which is arguably the second best league in the world, whereas Avdija has averaged just around 4 points a game, but again, in a very competitive EuroLeague, and at only 19 years old, the guard, forward, 6'10", could make a big splash in the NBA in the seasons to come. He's looking into the mid part of the lottery in that 6 to 10 range, which could be a landing spot for either the New York Knicks, Chicago Bulls, the Charlotte Hornets, the Phoenix Suns. So it'll be great to see where he lands next year and the impact that he not only has in the NBA, but for the whole country of Israel, who I believe the only other player to come out of Israel so far is Omar Caspi, who we last saw play for the Golden State Warriors last season. So again, Deni has a bright future ahead of him. We'll see what happens in the months moving forward. But it will be exciting to see him come overseas and hopefully make a name for himself in the NBA. And so the draft lottery, as we spoke about, August 25th, the NBA draft, we are looking at October 15th. And in between the lottery and the draft, we'll have a second round starting September 1st, the conference finals September 15th, and in the NBA Finals starting on the 30th of September, with the last possible finals game happening sometime between October 7th and October 12th. So now back to the NBA draft on the 15th, and then starting on October 18th or October 17th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, as we saw last year, with free agency beginning 6 hours prior to the exact date. We begin free agency, and now let's take a look at some of the players that will be available on the market. So, of course, we have Anthony Davis, who went through the big trade last year from going to New Orleans to the Lakers. As of now, it looks like he's a lock to re-sign. I mean, who doesn't want to play with LeBron James? The only issue is the team doesn't have many young players after Anthony Davis. The only other one being Kyle Kuzma, who I believe has maybe maxed out his potential so far in the NBA. But again, we'll see what happens after the season, but I'd say more than likely Anthony Davis is a lock to be a Laker for the foreseeable future. Next player, Draymond Green, who could help a lot of teams that are on the fringe of making the playoffs for the first time. I look mostly at the Atlanta Hawks, who could use the veteran leadership of a player like Draymond Green to help with their young talent of Trae Young, John Collins, DeAndre Hunter, and again, we'll also have another lottery pick to use as well. And then we have a couple solid restricted free agents. So more than likely, we'll see Pascal Siakam stay with the Raptors, Jaylen Brown stay with the Celtics, as they do have control over these players, as all they have to do is match whatever offer another team is willing to give one of these players. And then DeMar DeRozan and Andre Drummond both have player options coming into the next season. More than likely, they will opt out because, as we've seen, players want to get the most bang for their buck and maximize the most money they can get right now. And we've seen that players have a tendency to sign shorter contracts as a way to max out the most money they can get and have control of where they play. As we've seen in the 2010s and going into the 2020s, it's a players' league now. They almost have as much control as the owners do when it comes to what teams they want to play for, who they want to play with. And honestly, I think it's been good for the NBA to see this kind of freedom. Some people might think it ruins the game, but in my opinion, it makes things more interesting. And we saw this year with teams transitioning from going for a big three to going to a big two, as you see with the Lakers and Anthony Davis and LeBron, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, Russell Westbrook and James Harden, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see much of that this year. So a couple other solid players that are also restricted free agents is we have Buddy Hield, Caris LeVert, and Brandon Ingram, who has finally shown the promise that he offered as the number 2 overall pick a couple years back. And then outside of the restricted free agents, we have several contributors that could do good for playoff-bound teams, such as Danilo Gallinari, Eric Gordon, Fred VanVleet, and Mike Conley, who, again, will have a player option, but the likeliness of him opting out, since he is making $34 million at age 32, and he was on the decline this season, as we saw in Utah, he might want to stay with that contract. But again, everything will be determined once the season is over, and interesting things could develop at the end of the season in free agency, as we've seen since 2010 with LeBron and the decision. Free agency is basically the Christmas day, the unofficial other Christmas day of the NBA. Let's move forward with some of the other things left on the NBA schedule that we don't want to forget about. One being the awards for the season. And as we've seen so far, it's really a 3-man, I'd say maybe a 2-man race for MVP between LeBron and Giannis. Giannis' team has a better record. Giannis beats out LeBron in almost every statistical category except for assists. But LeBron did take a team that won 35 games last year. They did add Anthony Davis, but at 35 years old, he's taken a secondary seat to Anthony Davis, been more of a distributor rather than a scorer, and has done a great job of leading this team to the number 1 seed in a always competitive Western Conference. The next award the Rookie of the Year, which I think could be one of the more interesting awards in recent memory, as there's been a lot of hype around Ja Morant, his miraculous dunks, his willingness to go after some of even the best point guards in the NBA, such as Russell Westbrook, and not been afraid and has not backed down. But then we see Zion Williamson, who's come in, and he's played about 19 games now. So he's played 19 games. He'll get another 8 games when the season resumes, giving him a total of 27 games. In comparison to Ja Morant, who's played about 65 to 70 games. But at this point, it really ends up on the voter side of what they're more looking for. A complete season, a very good season, still probably one of the better seasons, maybe of all time, by a rookie point guard, by Ja Morant, or Zion Williamson, who came into the season late, might push the Pelicans over the hill into a playoff spot, is averaging nearly 24 points a game. He has a PER of 24.32, which I think ranks in the top 15 in the NBA, and has been a force not only on the offensive side, but the defensive side as well. So, I mean, we're picking against two very promising young stars, so it'll be interesting to see where it lands. In my opinion, Ja Morant's 70-plus games trumps Zion's 27 games of potential 27 games of brilliance. Again, we'll let the voters decide that after the season. And then for our next award is the comeback player, the most improved player in the NBA. And I think it's a no-brainer to look at a player like Brandon Ingram, who has had a tremendous breakout year due to, I would say, being able to have more of the offensive load in New Orleans that he ever did with the Lakers. I mean, it's tough playing on a team with LeBron James or a team with a player like a Russell Westbrook, that those players have the ball in their hands all the time. So allowing Brandon Ingram the ability to have the ball in his hand at all times has really allowed him, or to have the ball in his hand more often than it was with the Lakers, where with the Lakers, LeBron is dribbling around, last 5 seconds, passes the ball off to Josh Hart or Brandon Ingram, and at that point it's like shoot and make that. Whereas Brandon Ingram now has the ability to bring the ball up the court, allows him to create his own shot more than likely. So Brandon Ingram, I'd say definitely at the top of the list for most improved players in the NBA. Two other guys that we need to point out is Bam Adebayo, who arguably has been almost a top 15 player in the NBA. A lot of what he does can't be seen in the box score, but the ability, like we mentioned earlier, to guard all 5 positions, to rebound at a high level, and also to be a point forward. For someone who's a 6'9", 6'10", is very valuable. And then Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who another player who saw a change of scenery as a way to get the ball in his hands more in Oklahoma City, where him, Chris Paul, and Dennis Schroeder have seen great success together. And he looks like he's going to be a future All-Star for the very foreseeable future. So those 3 guys, at this point, I think it's almost a toss-up between the 3. But again, Brandon Ingram bringing the number 1 option on a team in comparison to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Bam Adebayo, who play more of a secondary role to Jimmy Butler in Miami and to Chris Paul in OKC. I think you got to go with Brandon Ingram here. The strides he's made, and he's nearly a 50-40-90 player when it comes to field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, and free throw percentage. I think allows him to jump those other 2 players in the most improved player in the NBA. Again, there's still 8 more games to play. A lot can be said in those 8 games, and we'll see what happens then. On to the next topic. So we have the awards. Those will come and go. But then we still have Summer League, training camp, and, of course, the preseason. So with the season ending on October 12th, the NBA is looking to probably have a shortened season once again for the 2020-21 season. Probably be best, as reports have been made out, that they're looking to have opening night on Christmas Day of 2020. Hopefully by then, have more answers to COVID and hopefully be able to have fans in the arena. We don't want to go, it's great that the NBA is coming back in July, but it's going to be very awkward at times without fans. I'm looking at the finals, whoever wins it, afterwards, there's not going to be 20,000 people in the stadium. It's going to be a stadium or an arena filled with maybe 100 to 200 people max. So it's not going to have that same excitement when the last buzzer goes off to end the 2020 season. So hopefully by the time November and December rolls around, we'll have a little more information and a little more clarity on bringing fans back into the arena. So we just discussed the NBA season. Stay tuned as I'm about to go into my top 10 players of all time. I think there's going to be a couple of wrinkles that some people might disagree with. They might not have thought of it in this way before, but I'll have a great breakdown of my top 10 players of all time. So we'll be back right after this commercial break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
We're back here on the GSMC podcast, and before we left for a break, we discussed the year-long NBA schedule from not just what's happening with the rest of the regular season as well as the playoffs, but everything that comes after, including the NBA draft lottery, the NBA draft, free agency, training camp, preseason, summer league, and eventually the start of the 2021 season. Reports came out yesterday that we're looking at not having fans for the entire 2020-21 season, so it's going to be really interesting to see how things look moving forward with not just the rest of this season, but next year as well. So we're going to move forward now to my favorite part of the podcast, and that is my personal top 10 of the day. And for today, I wanted to talk about my top 10 players of all time. This is a very controversial list typically because it's hard to compare eras. Like a guy like Bill Russell who won 11 championships in 13 years in an era where there was only 8 teams in the league, or Wilt Chamberlain who averaged absurd numbers that no one will ever touch or come close to in terms of 50 points per game for an entire season, or of course his infamous or famous, however you want to look at it, 100-point game. So I'm going to start with the honorable mentions of the people who just missed out, the players that just missed out on the list. I'm going to go in no particular order, but alphabetical. So I begin with Hakeem Olajuwon, one of the greatest two-way players of all time. 2 rings, was the only player to win during the Michael Jordan era. He also holds the record for most blocks of all time. Also one of the only players to win MVP and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season. So he barely is outside that top 10. I'll go into why I put him outside that top 10 later on when I go into the number 10 pick. We'll have a little discussion there. And then the next player, who I think might be one of the most underrated players in NBA history, the logo himself, Jerry West. Not only did he average 27 points per game, which ranks 4th all time, but he averaged 29 points per game in the playoffs. He's the only player to win Finals MVP when being on the losing end. Unfortunately for himself, he went 1-7 in the NBA Finals, which is probably one of the biggest blemishes on his resume. But again, he was going against an elite Boston Celtics dynasty that won 8 straight championships. So again, you can't blame him all the time, but there were a lot of close games. Unfortunately, it came out on the wrong end more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. But he was a 14-time All-Star as well, and one of the greatest scorers in NBA history that I think really gets overlooked because he played in an era that just wasn't as competitive to what we've seen starting in the 80s with Magic and Larry, to Michael Jordan in the 90s, to Shaq and Kobe in the 2000s, and LeBron and Dwayne Wade and all those players in the later half of that decade as well as into the 2010s. Next player, Julius Erving, who is one of the first players to play above the rim. He was not only one of the best players in the NBA, but the best player in the ABA, that was later abolished in 76 when they had a merger with the NBA. He is not only one of the best scorers of all time, but one of the greatest dunkers in NBA history. Had some famous dunk contests with Michael Jordan in the early, mid-80s. So, another player that barely missed out on the top 10. And then my next player, Oscar Robertson, averaged a triple-double. Not only is he the first player to average a triple-double for an entire season, but he averaged a triple-double for the first 6 years of his career. That is astounding. I don't think anyone will ever average a triple-double for 6 years straight. He had one ring with Kareem later on the back half of his career, and I would consider him one of the best all-around players of all time, someone who could rebound, pass, and score. And lastly, the last player to miss out on our top 10 is Steph Curry. This one might be a little controversial since he's still very young at 31 years old and has plenty of years left in him. But as of now, the man already has 3 rings, 5 straight finals appearances, playing for one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history. And he's a 2-time MVP back-to-back, and the only player to win it unanimously. And there's so much we can go to in how he's changed the game starting in 2013-14 with how it was always an inside game. You'd always start in the inside and then go out to the perimeter. And now it starts perimeter going inside. So he's completely changed the way we look at basketball. Many kids growing up these days, instead of working on their inside game, they're shooting threes. So we can't talk enough about how much he's done to change the game. So those were my 5 honorable mentions, and now we're going into the top 10. Before we begin, though, I want to point out that with my top 10, typically it's more based off the player's career rather than who they are just like as a player. Because in my opinion, like if I was starting an NBA franchise, I would want a player like LeBron James, who's 6'8", 260, built like a tank, sees the floor, can get to the basket at will, rather than, I mean, yes, Michael Jordan is the most competitive player of all time, but in terms of if I was building a player in a laboratory, I would probably pick someone with the body frame and the athletic ability of a LeBron James over someone like a Michael Jordan, over a Magic Johnson. But so just before we go, my top 10 is more based off career accolades, what they did over the course of their career, how they were as a teammate, a bunch of different factors than just who they were individually as a basketball player, if that makes sense. So let us begin with number 10 on the list, the Diesel, Shaquille O'Neal. One of the best big men in NBA history and arguably the most unstoppable player of all time. We all know that he had some issues with staying in shape, but that one season, that 99-2000 season, the one season that he was in shape the entire year, he dominated. He won MVP of the league. He won Finals MVP. The Lakers were unbeatable, and he was the main reason. Over the course of his career, he won 4 rings. As I mentioned, the 1 MVP. But a guy that, if he had the drive and the dedication that someone like a Kobe Bryant had, he might be the greatest player of all time. And I've read a lot of books in my day, and even there are people who rate Shaquille O'Neal back in 03-04 as the greatest player of all time. So the latter half of his career wasn't as successful as the first half, but again, if this guy just had the same work ethic, but he was a superstar. He wanted to enjoy his time in the NBA. He wanted to be a celebrity. He starred in movies. He did music videos. He rapped. It's the best analogy that I've heard from Bill Simmons is that he's the type of guy that could have got a 4.0, but instead instead of getting the 4.0 in college, he got the 3.4, 3.5, partied, did all these other things outside of just being a student, and enjoyed his time in the league, enjoyed his time in college. So that's how I put Shaquille O'Neal there. And then in terms of him against Hakeem, because honestly, Hakeem has the accolades to be ahead of Shaquille, but I would say that as a basketball player, Shaquille O'Neal was just more dominant, was more of a force. He does have more rings as well, but again, he didn't have to go against Michael Jordan at the same time, or didn't have to go against Michael Jordan for the same extended period as Hakeem, which Michael Jordan ruined a lot of people's careers. A lot of players do not have rings because of Michael Jordan. Karl Malone, John Stockton, Gary Payton, Clyde Drexler, Charles Barkley. The list goes on and on. So, number 10, Shaquille O'Neal. Now, number 9, and Shaq's running mate in LA, Kobe Bean Bryant. 5 rings, one of the greatest competitors in league history, ruthless, modeled his game after Michael Jordan, second greatest two-guard in NBA history. The guy could shoot from the perimeter. He could get to the rim. One of the greatest winners in NBA history. Not only did he win 3 titles early on in his career with Shaq, but won 2 titles back-to-back to end the decade, to end the 2000s. And I think those rings are very underrated. Before these big threes were formed, Kobe, the second best player on those teams, was Pau Gasol, who is a borderline all-star, I would say. A Hall of Famer, more due to his international roots than what he's done in the NBA. But, I mean, the combination of the two. But, yeah, I mean, those teams were not as strong as the teams we'll see later on in the next decade with those Miami Heat teams, or even that Boston Celtics team the year before that had 3 All-Stars. Kobe did not have as much help as some of these other teams that we'll see, and he was able to win an additional 2 titles, which I think are very underrated. And the reason that I put him at 9th instead of 8th is that the player that we're about to go into, who's number 8 on the list, I think is just a better overall teammate, was a more dominant player in his prime, not just from a scoring standpoint, but also from a passing, a rebounding, and just an overall better teammate. And that is Larry Legend, Larry Bird, who won the 3 titles, won 3 straight MVPs. 3 straight MVPs. Only 2 other players in league history have done that. Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. So I think that speaks volumes that a guy was able to win 3 straight MVPs during a time in the league where there was Michael Jordan, there was Magic Johnson. It was a very competitive league then in those mid-'80s. And you have to take into account that he is the best player on one of the greatest teams of all time, which is that 1985-86 Boston Celtics team. Moving on to number 7, and this is where it might get a little controversial. A lot of people would say that Kobe is better than this player. But again, I think the teammate aspect and what he brought to the Spurs organization, and we were talking about Tim Duncan coming in at number 7. The guy was 5-1 in the finals. Arguably could have been 6-0 if not for the most clutch shot in NBA history by Ray Allen in the 2012-2013 NBA Finals. And he is the greatest power forward of all time, an awesome teammate, and I'm talking about Kobe Bryant as a player, not as a human, because as a human, great person, but as a teammate and the way he strangleholded Lakers organization is something that Tim Duncan never did. In Tim Duncan's career, they never won less than 50 games. That is an astounding statistic. So every year, outside of the strike-shortened season of 98-99, the Tim Duncan-led Spurs won at least 50 games. They made the playoffs every year of his career. Next players, we're going to go into the old school era. And these guys, I think, so with number 6, we have Wilt Chamberlain. Like Shaq, one of the most dominant players of all time. He was so dominant, they had to widen the lanes because he was scoring too easily. The guy averaged 50 points and 25 rebounds in a single season. And of course, we all know how he scored 100 points in a single NBA game. And no one has come even close within 15% of that. The second closest record or scoring record is 81 points. It's an extra 19 points that Kobe would have to score to tie Wilt Chamberlain. So no one's come within 19% of Wilt Chamberlain's record. And that will never be broken. So he won 2 rings, lost a lot in the finals as well. Similar to Jerry West, came up against a really good Boston Celtics dynasty. And that brings us to number 5, Bill Russell. 11 rings in 13 years, the greatest winner in professional sports, and one of the greatest defensive players in league history. Again, we can't really compare eras because I know Bill Russell, who's maybe 6'8", 6'9", probably wouldn't be a center, wouldn't be considered a center in today's NBA. He'd be more of a 4. But it's just too hard to compare, but the guy won. That's all that matters. The guy beat who was in front of him. He won 8 straight titles. He won a title as a coach. I don't think that gets enough credit in itself that the guy was able to coach the team while leading them to an NBA championship. So let's recap a little. We've gone through the first 6 players. Number 10, Shaquille O'Neal. Number 9, Kobe Bryant. Number 8, Larry Bird. Number 7, Tim Duncan. Number 6, Wilt Chamberlain. And number 5, Bill Russell. So now we're at number 4. And personally, one of my favorite players of all time, Magic Johnson. Someone who is able to control an entire game, not by scoring, but by getting his teammates involved, which I think is invaluable. The guy made 9 finals appearances in 11 years, and is probably the greatest pure point guard the NBA has ever seen. He has an NBA record, 11.2 assists per game, and has 5 rings to show for it with 4 losses, going up in one of the most competitive eras in the NBA. Before Magic and Larry came, it was a different league. It was stricken by drugs, selfish players, and once Larry and Magic came into the league, they changed it for the better. And that is where the 80s is what brought the game to a national level, and then moving forward into the 90s, Michael Jordan brought it to a international, global level. So Magic Johnson is number 4 on my list. And now, getting into the top 3. And number 3 is LeBron James. Many people have him at number 2, but I think his career is not yet over. And the 2 players ahead of him, I think their resumes speak for themselves. But LeBron James has still won 3 rings in probably the most competitive league we have ever seen, going up against a tough Spurs team in 06-07. At 2010-2011 Mavs finals, I think that's his only unexcusable finals loss. That's 1 and 2 in terms of his finals losses. And then the next year, he beats OKC. The year after that, he beats the Spurs in that classic Game 6 with the Ray Allen shot. And then the Warriors come into play. Something that we've never seen. A team that was able to shoot the lights out with Steph and Clay. And it was just that first finals, LeBron comes in. He has very little help. He's playing with 2 undrafted players in Timothy Mozgov and Matthew Dellavedova. So 2 undrafted players. LeBron is going up against one of the greatest backcourts of all time in Curry and Thompson. And he's got Timothy Mozgov and Matthew Dellavedova as 2 of his starters because Kyrie Irving, who we remember injured himself in Game 1, in a game that they should have won but lost in overtime. And then with Kevin Love, who unfortunately got hooked up with Kelly Olynyk and dislocated his shoulder and was out for the rest of the postseason. So that finals loss, I think, is definitely excusable on his part. And then the next year, the 2015-16 season, we see the greatest comeback in NBA Finals history. Down 3-1 in the finals. They stormed back thanks to a Draymond Green suspension. But LeBron came out and Kyrie, they showed up, dropping 40-40s, I believe, in back-to-back games. So LeBron is third on the list. Hopefully, we'll see how the rest of this season plays out, but he could be in line for a 4th ring. And now to number 2 on the list. And I think this is a player that just doesn't get enough due. He's the all-time leading scorer in NBA history, winner of 6 NBA Finals, 6 NBA Finals, and a 6-time MVP, most all-time. And has one of the greatest, most unstoppable moves of all time, the skyhook, and we're talking about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he had a 19-year career, which as a center is unprecedented, especially during the 80s and 90s, because I'd say players who are 7 foot and taller typically break down a little bit quicker than guys who are smaller. It's just human anatomy. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I mean, yes, he had help with Magic Johnson for several of those titles, but I don't think we can speak enough about how great he was. He was by far the best player during the 70s, where he won the majority of his MVPs. He won a couple Finals MVPs as well, and was not just the best player in the NBA, but is considered also one of the greatest college players of all time. So again, I have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at number 2 on my list of the top 10 players of all time. And for the finale, drum roll please, I have none other than Michael Jordan. 6-0, unblemished record in the finals. An amazing two-way player that I think gets overshadowed due to his offensive prowess. If you look at it this way, he gave you 30 points every time he stepped on the court. He averaged 30.1 points per game for his entire career, which is number 1 all time, just a smidge ahead of Wilt Chamberlain. So the guy, he could do no wrong. He could walk on water, and as I mentioned earlier, so many great players, so many Hall of Fame players do not have rings because of Michael Jordan. So there's my top 10 for you. I'm going to go through it one last time. At number 10, Shaquille O'Neal. Number 9, Kobe Bryant. Number 8, Larry Bird. Number 7, Tim Duncan. Number 6, Wilt Chamberlain. Number 5, Bill Russell. Number 4, Magic Johnson. Number 3, LeBron James. Number 2, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And to round it up, number 1 of my top 10 players of all time, Michael Jordan. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. It was a great show. Before I let you guys go, I just want to let you know that there was reports that came out yesterday that players are a little iffy on whether or not they want to move forward with the restart of this season. They think it's too soon. They think it's unfair that they didn't get a vote in all of this. And I have to agree that, yes, the NBA is amazing. I love basketball. I love the NBA. But right now there's more important things going on in the world than basketball. But I know as a country, I think it might benefit as well to have live sports back on TV. But I don't think it's wise to push it if it's not a complete necessity, especially with the health of the players, their families, and all the coaching staff and everyone who's a part of these NBA organizations that should be arriving in Orlando as early as next month. So we're going to have to see what happens moving forward, but I hope that the players and the owners can come to a civil agreement, and we'll see what happens. Hey, thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review, because that really helps us out. Also, if you can, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.